Mm. So the point of the talk is to introduce you to grey seals, their life and times, really. So some of their ecology, some of you know, what they get up to while we see them so up close. Around North Wales, we've got quite a couple of seal species, but the major species that you'll see, heads bobbing or Haulouts, are the grey seals. So there are common seals around and about, but it's the grey seal that you're going to see more of. And actually, even though when you're out close to sort of little islands or at certain times of the year and you see them fairly regularly, and actually if you know the numbers that we get up in Scotland, the vast numbers, you'd be surprised to know that the grey seal is actually really quite a rare seal species. So there are 32 species of seal around the world, and the grey seal is one of the rarest. And actually we hold about 40% of the global population lives in and around the UK. 90% are up in Scotland, but we do have a good wodge down here, and they certainly like to use the beaches and the islands and stuff. So you generally, if you're on the coast, you're not too far away from a grey seal a lot of the time. Okay, so grey seals, I've actually got a strange Latin name. Their Latin name translates as sea pig with a hooked nose, which is, I think, very unfortunate. Not the pig version, but the hooked nose. I think they've got a very beautiful nose. So I've already talked through that. So we actually have 90%, 95% of the European total of grey seals. So actually that gives us a reason to actually, a need, an obligation to look after our seal species. We have to, it's our responsibility to look after them. So we need to be keeping an eye on them a little bit more. They're pretty large animals, they're carnivores. We call them sea mammals. They do spend an awful lot of time on the shore, lazing about, doing lots of things. They come on the shore for lots of really important parts of their lives. So females can be up to 2 meters, males can be about 2.5 meters. And when you think that is quite long, but when you think about how rounded they can be as well, they're pretty huge animals up close. Grey fur is also, is it grey fur? Because they're called the grey seal, but they can be anything from dark brown all the way to black. They can be any colour of sort of greys, and they can also be like a sandy colour and beigey colour all the way to white. So the name is a little bit confusing. And the mottled, the little spots on them are actually spots that they have from birth and go all the way through their lives with those spots. They develop and they build up scar tissue and other things. But those spots, if a photographer had taken a really good picture of the grey seal from both sides, then that can be used to identify those seals. So they have their spots are very individual, so you can get a really good idea about whether the seal that you happen to be spotting is coming back all the time, so is a regular. They are totally covered, well, I say totally, they are pretty covered in blubber. That blubber is something that they work on through the summer months. They go out and really have a really good feed. Sometimes they'll go off for days and have a really good feed out. And then when they sort of towards the late summer, August time, September time, which is a really important time for breeding, they sort of decide that they want to spend a bit more time on land, and they turn up absolutely humongous. They're enormous. And I can imagine their size, their thickness of their blubber layer has probably increased from the 6 centimeters to the 10 centimeters thick, which is actually, almost a decent size layer of blubber, which is used for insulation. Because as we get further and further into the winter, our seas do tend to turn quite cold and grim, so they need that blubber layer for insulation. But also that blubber layer is something that they built up over the years so that it gets them through. So it's like their nutrition, they're sort of warding off starvation, really, because they've got a lot to get through while they're out on the haulouts. And a lot of the time they choose to not feed, and certainly not go out and to feed well. So they're using that blubber layer throughout this season now. They have fur as well, which is they have 2 layers. One's well, they're both quite dense. One's a waterproof layer. Both of them need a lot of looking after, and they molt so that they can start afresh each year, really. It's almost like a New Year molt, but it isn't quite. But their flippers don't have a big, thick layer of blubber, and neither do their face. The face has some sort of, fat around it. So those are the 2 areas of a seal that feel the cold. So within their flippers, they have the blood that's coming from the heart, fully oxygenated and quite warm from being within the body, can go into the flippers. And when it goes to an area that's quite the veins and the arteries quite close to the surface, then that's an area where animals can lose a lot of heat. So with seals and with many other animals, what they've done instead is have this countercurrent exchange system, which basically wraps the veins around the arteries, and that sort of maintains the heat. So the veins that go back to the heart are warmer than they maybe normally would be, being so close to the outside sea temperature. Seals are incredibly streamlined as well. You've probably all seen seals underwater compared to on land. They're definitely, even though I'm saying they're quite landish animals, but they're very definitely built for the sea. They have streamlined body. Those back flippers are used as a sort of a propeller, really. So they'll use those to sort of move themselves swiftly through the water. If they're moving through the water at speed, and they're incredibly agile and lithe, they'll put their fore flippers close to the sides, and then use their tail as a rudder. So everything is useful on a seal. Grey seals have lots of different senses, I suppose, than us. So their hearing, they do have ears, even though you can't see them. Their ears are within a little hole at the side, and have a specifically adapted ear bone so that they can hear certain wider frequencies underwater. They're also directional, obviously, like ours are, because they're at the sides of the heads, and so if a noise is coming from that direction, they can understand the direction it's coming from. And seals, they will use their hearing, but also their nostrils when they're on land to assess things that they can't necessarily see immediately. So on land, actually, hearing is just as important. But also their nostrils are very good at picking up certain scents on land. Their nostrils are also the things that they use to identify each other, obviously, and so is their hearing. So they know each other's calls, or they can get to know each other's calls, especially mother and baby. But very importantly as well are the whiskers. So the whiskers are built to detect vibrations in the water, and are incredibly important for seals to catch prey. So they have a few pairs, 3 to 6 pairs of whiskers as eyebrows. I mean, I'm saying eyebrows here. Then they've got a couple of whiskers on their nose, and then they've got, about 50 either side of their mouth. And those are all important. They're not necessarily important on land, but they are very important when they're underwater. So the whiskers are in full use underwater here. You can see that they're pointed forward, and that's basically how a seal detects what it's either chasing to hunt, or else what it's investigating, which clearly here was a diver with some photographic equipment, which incidentally is not the way to see a seal, really. Please don't go diving in order to see seals. If you happened to have a seal come to visit you, then you're incredibly lucky, but going diving to look for seals is not ideal. They're massive animals anyway, and actually that's their world, so they need a lot of time. We're doing enough damage, I suppose, to their world in lots of different ways. So they actually need that space away from us a lot of the time. So the whiskers are called vibrissae, and as you can see there, the nostrils are closed. It's a really great picture of the nostrils. So a seal doesn't use its sense of smell underwater because it needs to close its nostrils, otherwise it'll, have quite a gulp of water. And especially important for a seal, as well as the vibrissae, which obviously it uses as it hones in close to a prey. But they also use their eyes, and now they have big eyes so that they can see in slightly murkier water, which we do have on occasion. So we do have really clear water sometimes, but we also have an awful lot of lovely nutrition and plankton blooms and some sediment that moves around when we have storms and stuff. So the underwater world can be quite difficult to maneuver around. So those large eyes are really helpful. Those eyes actually, if you ever see a seal, which we regularly do, with wetted eyes, it's actually a lot of the time that is a sign of a healthy seal, because they need this secretion to sort of cover, to keep their cornea, very in tip-top working order. So sometimes you'll see some wetness around a seal's eyes. There's an awful lot that we still are learning about seals and all sorts of other animals, and technology is certainly helping inform us slightly more. This is a very busy slide, unfortunately. My sort of wording has sort of been eaten up with everything else that the Sea Mammal Research Unit is doing. So this is an organisation that's part of St Andrews University, I think, up in Scotland. And they do a lot with sea mammals, but they've, as part of that, they've been using tags, as well as other organisations and research groups, to find out more about seals. So to find out where they go, where they fish, how long they spend underwater, where they tend to spend their time. Is it with each other? How many different haulouts do they use? And so there's an awful lot of things we really don't know about seals. So like I said, SMRU are one of many organisations who are studying all sorts of sea mammals, but with new technology, which is just sort of leaping us forward in terms of the information, including actually the information about how deep seals will dive. So in foraging dives, seals might only go to about 50 meters and spend a few minutes, but using these tags, some seals have been shown to dive for over an hour underwater, and down to 400 meters. So it's a quite a flexible sort of opportunity that seals have if they really know that there's going to be an awful lot to eat further down, or if they want to investigate, then they have that capacity. And they have that capacity because they have these adaptations that allow them to deep dive. So they have oxygen which can be stored in blood and muscle. They have an increased ability to, so their hemoglobin, I think, can hold more oxygen than ours can as well. So that helps with all sorts of different things, buoyancy, the bends, and then when they come back up, before a deep dive, actually, they'll lower their heart rate to about 40 beats per minute, and they'll try and expel most of the air from the lungs. When they're diving, they can actually hone most of their blood so that it just hits the lungs and the heart and the head, so just the very vital parts of their body. And then when they come back up to the surface, they need to spend a bit of time with a much increased heart rate, up to 120 beats per minute perhaps, so that they can replenish all of that oxygen, but also get rid of the build up, the respiratory waste that's built up. So there's actually just bobbing around on the surface can be really important for a seal. Resting is really important, whether it's at a haul out site or just in the water with head up, full of oxygen, because actually that's what they need, that oxygen to digest their food. So if they have caught something on this deep dive, then as well as replenishing their oxygen, they also need to use that oxygen then to digest their food. So yeah, fishing is part of the diet that they eat are fish, shellfish, squids and stuff, but some seals have adapted and learned how to eat small cetaceans like porpoise, so which is really very interesting, but a bit gruesome as well. So yeah, they're very flexible animals. Incidentally, they have Catholic tastes, but seals, I think seals were also one of those animals that were allowed to be used as meat on a Friday, because it was only fish on a Friday, but a seal was seen to be a sea animal, and so it wasn't classed as meat. So yeah, I think that's another sea creature that's been allowed to be eaten as fish on Friday. Oh, that's the wrong button. Okay. Talking about needing oxygen and stuff, you'd think that seals would need to sleep on land or with their heads up, like this one clearly is, in the water. But actually seals can sleep well, so there's another sleeping that just I've filled the slideshow with sleeping seals actually, because I found some of these were just amazing. So they can sleep head up above the water, and they sleep if they're sort of head up and then the rest of their body is sort of vertically sort of underneath them. That's called bottling, which is basically what bottles do in the water, they sort of bob up and down. This seal could actually, if he just went underwater slightly, he could sleep for several minutes before popping his head up. So sometimes they sleep just underneath the surface of the water. But some really need a pillow, and so head further down and find a nice little place to tuck themselves in. This one actually looks like it's tucked itself in, so it can have a sleep and not sort of float up to the surface by jamming its body in a crevice. So sleep is vital. Some will sleep regularly just close to a haul out site. So there was a bigger haul out site close to here, and a lot of these animals are just sort of in the shallows, just quite close to it. So as well as the haul out, the shallows are really quite an important part of that sort of haul out habitat. So yeah, they do spend a good deal of time at sea, but yeah, they have very individual haul out patterns, so they don't always come, go and head out in a similar place and then come back to the same area. A lot of them probably will have to sort of choose different areas to feed, and so we'll just sort of haul out locally. Haul out sites are incredibly important. So a haul out site is basically a beach for a grey seal. It could be a rocky shore as well, caves, some sort of bay areas and stuff, and they'll use them for lots of different things, but all of them important. So like I said, resting and digesting is a really important part of their life, but also pupping, breeding and molting are all really important things, and they haul out for those reasons as well. So we do have, when I say that there's no haul out pattern, everybody's individual, we do have some animals that do come back regularly to certain haul out sites to breed, so they're showing site fidelity. So I'm sure the more that we get to learn about seals because of increased technology and maybe an increase in the pattern recognition, then we'll get to know more about how many seals are sort of returning back to particular haul out sites. At a haul out site, there's an awful lot of there can be an awful lot of noise, and the moaning is generally the females. So they're either telling a male to go away because they're not interested. They're telling another seal, whether it's male, female, juvenile, whatever, to leave them alone because that's their patch and they don't want to move. Sometimes they'll even have a bit of an argument with the tide that's coming in because the tide's splashing them and they don't like it. So there's an awful lot of noise at a grey seal site in comparison to a common seal site, which is fairly wider spread animals, and also there's less, it seems, argy-bargy, or certainly less vocalizations. So you'll know if you're, even if you don't know how to identify the two different seals, you'll know from seeing seals spread out on a sandbank that it's much more likely to be the common or harbour seal than the grey seal. So males, and this goes for males and females, and probably any animal, really, wild animal, that is basically they've got to be born and get through that first year or that first patch of life, depending on, I mean, first year is, some animals don't even live that long really, but they've got to get through a patch of time when they're juveniles, because that's a really big, tricky time for them to get through. Once they've done that, males can live in the wild up to about 25 years, females to 30. The oldest known female so far that we're aware of was a 46-year-old from Shetland Islands. So the 25 and 30 years old is an average, and with certain issues that are around today, you know, it actually could be reducing just because of, you know, the chemicals in the water and pollutants and people, animals getting caught in all sorts of netting and plastic and stuff. But so yes, this is, you know, what's known now. Let's hope it stays that way, but yeah, it's a tricky life for a seal. Maturity, for males, they can be mature between 4 and 6 years, but males really do, to get some good matings in, they ought to be the ones that can hold on to a territory, and to do that a lot of the time they have to be maybe 8 to 10 years, because then they'll sort of build up a bit of muscle and weight, and then can ward off other males of the same size. Females can start breeding from between 3 and 5 years, and they only have, well, I say they only have one pup a year. I think there was an incident last year where it seemed that there was twins. Certainly there was 2 feeding from one female. So yeah, I think it's rare, but they can have more than one. It is difficult because a female, when she's feeding her pup, she actually can lose about 1/4 of the weight that she's built up over the summer. This is one of the reasons why they're building up that weight, so they can, you know, maintain themselves while they're not doing too much feeding. So mating, which is sort of about to happen now. Mating can start basically with hormone changes. So the males become aggressive and start seeking the females. The females will become receptive as well. A lot of the time, if a female's bred and had a baby, she'll become receptive immediately after. So which is why it's a really tricky time for a pup, actually, because if a pup, later season pup, is still on the beach when there's an awful lot of aggression, fights sometimes, certainly posturing, and even a posturing male seal could land on a pup and kill it. So the female's really got to protect her pup, but then she's also, you know, coming slightly into you know, being receptive. So it's a tricky time. So as well as females needing to feed her baby and therefore not going out to sea and feeding, the males can't risk feeding at this point, because they've got to maintain that beach power. They've got to stay put and fight, so that they're losing a lot of that blubber that they've built up over the summer. Mating isn't just a one-off. There's lots of goings on at this time. And it all happens. If you have a haul out close to you, you can see all of that really in front of you. This is a mating, so this is yeah, well, I don't think I need to explain much more than that, but this is a male being very delicate with his flipper over the side of the female, and yeah, so sometimes they need a bit of coercion, so there's a lot of flippering, and the female saying, no, I'm not ready yet, and actually it's not necessarily always the dominant male that gets the matings. There are sneaky males, sneaky matings. And then this is the result over a year later. So that female doesn't the fetus just doesn't attach to the uterus, or immediately. So the female heads through the molt and back out the other end, and then when she's managed to get back out and had a feed, that's when her fetus starts to properly develop and attaches to the uterus and becomes a fully developing baby. So, which is a very sensible thing to do, because a lot can happen with over the winter with the molting and with acquiring food. So a lot of animals do this, which is hold on to a pregnancy and don't properly fully start it until they've gone through a really delicate time of the year. So the pups are born, grey seal pups are born with a white coat. Immediately the female will turn around and try and learn to recognize her pups smell and its call as well, and vice versa. Now this, on some of the Welsh beaches in North Wales, we don't get vast sort of numbers of pupping animals, but up in Scotland and on Skomer apparently they have hundreds of pups. So it's a really important part of the birth and the whole sort of nurturing situation, is that the mum needs to be able to recognize her baby, because sometimes babies can get lost when there's lots of animals on the beach. The pup is totally reliant on the mum for milk. The mum will head out to sea, sit in the sea, keeping an eye on the baby, like I said, not feeding at all, and then will come up onto the beach when things are safe. She will come up onto the beach maybe 3 to 6 times a day, and will spend 10-15 minutes feeding the pup, and the pup develops very quickly. So the pup builds this enormous sort of layer of blubber from this milk, which is over 50% fat, and depending on how well and how successful the mum has been feeding her pup, weaning could happen in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks time the pup could be totally well fed, had been left by its mother, and starts to lose its fur coat and become spotty. So yeah, or it can be take 3 weeks. So yeah, it's not long at all for the pup to start becoming really quite a chunky pup and start losing its fur. The picture on the top is a pup doing what a lot of animals are doing when they lose their coat, which is having a scratch. So it's a really itchy time for all the animals that are going through the molt. It's a really tricky time. They become irritable and things that itchy all over. So when animals are, this is one of the pups without its white coat, it becomes instantly unrecognizable. It's very difficult to recognize the pup other than the size of them when they've gone from white to spotty. So yeah, molting is basically a heap of seals, adult seals on a beach, being really irritable and just lazing about. They look really listless and tired. Their blood vessels have actually come to the surface so that they can replenish this and start the regrowth of hair once they've lost some hair. So the regrowth starts quite quickly. There's 2 layers, don't forget, of hair. So it's a big deal, and actually a single animal will take about 6 weeks to go through the molt. And that I think I have read that, I'm not sure I've seen it, but I have read that the molt can be size sort of ranged, really. So it starts with a pup, and then it's the juveniles that molt, and then it's the females, and then it's the males. So I think a lot of the time it's just a lot of animals on the beach, just being yeah, really tired, irritable with each other, very compacted as well. So and yeah, so heading into the sea at that point, if they were disturbed, and disturbance happens a lot around the UK, a lot of people are unaware that there's seals on areas, or that, you know, that dogs happen to see seals before the people do, and they can't call them back. Disturbance comes from land and sea, and also now from air. So so they can be easily disturbed, really. So they do keep an eye out and get used to certain sort of levels of noise and sort of visitor numbers or whatever, but yeah, they can be disturbed. And disturbance, when they're molting, I mean, obviously when they're pupping, it can be devastating for the pup mum bond, for the pup itself, but when they're molting, those blood vessels are so close to the surface that if they're disturbed and they go into the sea, and they spend more time in the sea than they want to in January, February time, that's a really cold sea, and that's an awful lot of heat loss that they'll experience, just because they'll be out in the sea for probably several hours after a serious disturbance level. So it's a really tricky time for them, and it's an important time that we need to give them space to get on with. And as I mentioned before, seals do have an awful lot to contend with, especially marine litter now, but even years ago they were hunted. People use their oils and, like I mentioned, meat, and their skin for clothing. These days their biggest worry, I would say, probably is the pollution and toxins in our seas, including plastic litter and including sort of ghost nets like this. Ghost nets, really, and marine litter full stop, is really difficult for an animal to deal with, because it just slows the animal down, and it's just it's a slowing and a reduction in their survivability. This net actually will probably, I mean, easily, because seals do go up close to rocks and stuff, could easily tangle in a rock while it's on the seal, and so that would be devastating. But the pollution levels as well are also going to be affecting our seals in terms of their ability to survive and their immunity, or also could be passed on to pups. So actually it's a tough time. So the more that we can do to conserve these really important places and to help the seals when they're out and about, fishing, swimming and stuff, the better, really. We all have to sort of, you know, take note of the things that we can be doing to help. This is a seal in North Wales. The other picture was from Norfolk, I think, but this is a seal from North Wales with a fishing line round its neck. Now this, the seals, like I said, they will fight, and so they have wounds, and this is a wound that regularly sort of opens up, because the seal goes out to feed and builds up sort of blubber layer. It actually sort of opens up some wounds that had healed nicely, and so repeatedly this happens, so that a lot of seals come back to a haul-out site the year later and they've still got the same gash, but we know that actually that gash sort of heals. But this is something that's going to carry on happening to the seal, because the line can't be cut. It's nylon line. I don't know whether it's possible that you can see that. So yeah, so it's fishing line, but just plastic pollution and plastic sort of out there in the seas where it shouldn't be is a big problem. So yeah, if you can join the Conwy branch on their next beach clean, please do, or do a one yourself every time you go to the beach. Pick up litter, but also have a think about what you're consuming as well. Christmas is coming up, we've got Halloween in the way. Please just reduce what plastic you're using. It's going to help, definitely. Talking about disturbance from land, there are different levels of disturbance. I can't actually see that now, so I'm just going to come further down and talk you through it. So this is from I don't even know how to say that, Ethan, I think it's a Scottish island, but these seals were disturbed, I think, by a dog, and just totally stampeded into the water. This is when pups can get really in a lot of trouble, but a lot of animals, I don't know whether anybody saw some that they will do this from cliffs and really damage themselves. So there's different levels of disturbance, so you'll know that you've disturbed an animal even just by the fact that they're looking at you. So that's a low level alertness disturbance. So what you need to do then is to not spend too much time with that animal and move away. Medium level, the animal actually moves its body and its face either towards you or towards where it wants to escape to. So that's medium level, and none of us really should be getting close enough to seals for that to happen. And it happens sort of, you know, from land and from sea actually. And then obviously this is a stampede, is gross disturbance, so it's the worst level of disturbance, and it's a big deal. There's a sign now helping people understand how to what to look out for and how to behave when they see animals. So right now it is pupping season, and pups, like I said, the mum will leave a pup on a beach. So you might find a pup on a beach. It's not necessarily in trouble, but it could be. So if you have time, it's a nice idea to be able to either revisit and see whether the pup's still there several tides, or, you know, a couple of tides later, just to make sure that the pup is being attended to by the mum. So I mean, you can always, if you're worried, there are people to contact, the RSPCA, British Divers Marine Rescue as well, Marine Life Rescue. They can give advice, as well as if there is an issue, they can come and help rescue the animal. And one of the pictures I showed you before, when I was talking about the blubber layer and the flippers, you saw, I forgot to mention, there was a tag on that animal's flippers. And those are often tags which highlight the animal has been rescued and tagged. And so if you see an animal that's tagged, if you've got a decent camera, because we don't want you getting up close to the animal, but if you've got a decent camera, and take a photo of it, and send it either to us or send it to the Sea Mammal Research Unit, then they'll be able to identify where that animal was tagged and where it was rescued from. And the people who were rescued it would love to hear about the animal still alive and thriving. And on the left we have the Marine Code, which is directed mainly at people with vessels, but it also works for, but it's basically anyone out on the water, but it also works for kayakers, anybody, swimmers as well. Anyone who is spending time in or on the water needs to know exactly how to behave around dolphins, seals, floating birds, getting close to cliffs. All of that is inadvisable, and especially within certain periods of time or seasons. So yes, to get to know, and I put a picture there of Gwynedd Marine Code, but the Gwynedd Marine Code is a copy of the Ceredigion, and it's been taken and Conwy as well, so it's something that's possibly going to be a marine code for the whole of Wales, and it's basically, it just tells people really clear things to do, which is basically don't chase the animal, try not to get up too close, don't spend too long with them, and just reduce your speed, and just be respectful, really. Okay, so, and if you are respectful and you do give animals space, and this happens for all wildlife, but especially seals, this is such an animal that gives you the privilege of seeing almost every part of the important parts of its life. So how many other mammals do we know in the UK that have their babies out and they show them off, basically? A lot of animals hide their babies, they'll go up a tree or in a cave or down a hole, or won't come out until nighttime. So this is a really privileged sight to see a seal up close, and if you do and give it time to or give it space, really, then what you'll see is all sorts of things. So if you spend time watching a bit of seals on occasion, you'll see lots of greetings happening, lots of sleeping, bottling, logging, stretching, yawning, scratching, especially in the molting season, lots of flippers, slapping, and digging in cool sand. We won't see that generally here. We don't have that many sandy beaches that seals use. Body slapping. This is a well and truly getting a slap, this male from a female. And howling. A lot of animals do, well, a lot of juvenile seals do this sort of howling thing and sort of splaying their bodies because they're getting ready for the mating season. Females apparently as well, young females have been seen to run up to males, big old males, and basically slap them in the face when they're sleeping with their flipper, and then run off when the male wakes up. So yeah, so that happens in the school playground and on a beach with seals as well. Juveniles will play and writhe over each other in the shallows for hours and hours and hours as well. So and yeah, flippering after singing. So the singing is basically the female saying, I'm not happy about you being that close to me, so move away, instead of what the sailors that were drifting to rocks were enamored with this singing, this amazing sort of moany sort of song in the mist. But basically it was a female saying, get away, that's my spot. And then you could see that this isn't strictly bananaing, but bananaing is a particular habit that animals do. So I've already explained that the seals are covered in this lovely thick layer of blubber, except for their flippers and their face. So if this seal, if you can imagine this, because this seal is actually just on a stretch. So, but if this seal, they will hold this position on occasion if they're on like a beach or a rock or whatever, and the tide starts coming in and it starts sort of splashing just at the bottom, and the things that are getting splashed, if they're getting splashed on their sort of body area, that's not going to feel so bad because they're covered in blubber. But the flippers and their face aren't quite so much, and so what they do is move them out of the way of the splashing tide, and end up making this sort of banana shape. So it's well worth keeping an eye out for those as well. And that's it. So I hope I haven't rushed it through too much, but I think we were sort of dicing with time a little bit. So so yes, thank you very much, everybody, for sticking around and learning a little bit more about our seals. The more I think people learn about seals, the better, because then they're more likely to be respectful. And you know, there are so many people who love our seals locally, so and really are willing to put themselves out. So if we can put ourselves out by just knowing how to behave around them, that's all the better, really.